the clock, it's 13. You've been working.
Well, hello and welcome. We all know that 2020 and 2021 have changed corporate IT and communications forever. A quick question is now a ping on Slack, boardroom discussions on our Zoom calls at the kitchen table or the shared office. We've adapted quickly to those changes, and a year later, it's clear that large-scale remote work is not only possible, it's in many ways preferable. Both businesses and individuals can benefit from having a work-from-anywhere policy, but if individuals don't have the tools to communicate naturally, remote work can feel isolating and optimizing teamwork can be frustrating. Welcome to Smartsheet Sessions, a series exploring how businesses can power growth, creativity, collaboration, and achievement by transforming their approaches to work. So let's get started. I'm Martin Veach, former editor-in-chief at CIO, the world's #1 resource for chief information officers leading organizations in the digital age. In this session, we're exploring how IT provisions and operating models can support the hybrid workplace. All over the world, businesses and IT leaders are tackling a tools challenge. In the new workplace, the right platforms can help employees become more proactive, efficient, and agile, but the wrong ones can fragment teams, cause security risks, and lead to wasted investments. Joining me to explore tech empowerment and business success are IT leaders Prerit Garg. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Smartsheet. We also have Abdul Chavdar, Group Data Protection Officer at Delivery Hero. Now, Prerit has led large engineering teams and founded 2 cloud-based startups. He drives technical strategy at Smartsheet, creating a collaborative work management platform that helps customers around the globe improve how they work. At Delivery Hero's Berlin office, Abdul Chavdar oversees a worldwide network of online food ordering sites, and he has insight into equipping 30,000 employees in about 50 countries with the tools to serve over 500,000 restaurant partners. Now, there are various approaches being mooted on how hybrid workplaces can best operate. For the purposes of this discussion, we're defining a hybrid workplace as a strategy for having a blend of remote and on-site workers, or with employees who spend some time working from home and some time in the office. An IFMA survey recently found that 81% of SMEs expect more than a quarter of employees to work remotely most of the time, even when the pandemic is over. Now, Prerit, if I can come to you first, what advantages do you think this shift to hybrid working brings to businesses, and why should CIOs accommodate them?
It's a great question, Martin. By the way, I would start by telling you that in my team of over 500 people, we're going to have majority of them working remotely, like nearly 100% of them will be working remotely. So your number on quarter of them is pretty on the low side. So now taking your question on, I think when I think about it, we've been on this journey for work from anywhere or remote work for the last 2 decades. The promise of the internet was that people can connect and communicate from anywhere in the world. And tools like video conferencing and email have been on this slow rise for the last 2 decades. But humans are creatures of habit. And so we needed a crisis, an unfortunate crisis, but we needed a crisis like the pandemic to actually force us into changing habits. And so silver lining on this crisis has been that it basically forced everybody to go home and figure out new way of working. And so what we've seen is sort of over the last 18 months or so, we've seen people adapt to new ways, like dramatically new ways of working. I'll give you example from my own organization, and I think it applies to most organizations in the world now, which is March of last year, all of us basically went home, right? And we had to figure out how are we going to stay connected? How are we going to be effective? And of course, the first natural thing people do is they try to emulate what they've been doing in office, right? And what they'd been doing in office was they would have meetings. And so the first natural thing was we moved our meetings from being in office to being online. And so we started using video conferencing tools. So we were having these meetings now over video conferencing. Then we figured out that, well, video conferencing can be actually pretty exhausting. And all day video conferencing can be pretty exhausting. So then what you started seeing is a massive use of asynchronous ways of communicating. So our own usage of tools like Smartsheet and documents and Slack just dramatically rose, right? Because people don't want to sort of sit in front of a video conference all day long. So I think, and then what we also found was that people were finding the flexibility of working from anywhere actually a great advantage. They don't have to commute. The focus time got better because there were less distractions. You have to be intentional if you were going to get on a meeting, as an example. So we saw many benefits, so much so that, as I said, majority of the people in my organization of 500 plus are saying, we like the new way of working and we're going to stay working this way.
Well, it's a nice advert for Smartsheet there. You might get a few applicants based on that for the people who hate the dreaded commute to the office. Not everyone can do this stuff. It really is for knowledge workers and information workers. We can't forget that a lot of people have to show up, and that's absolutely critical. But I think it's pretty clear that hybrid working is the future for many workplaces, certainly if they're not JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. And that means that we're really rethinking how work is done and reimagining how office spaces could be used. So, Prayer, one more for you, just very briefly, if I could. How can CIOs, do you think, rethink concepts like communication, training, development, and knowledge exchange with digital workplace tools in mind as an integral component of how that work is done?
Yeah, to be honest, Martin, I think we're gonna learn as the pandemic ends. I think just like we adapted and we learned over the last 18 months, some of us, as we start using our office spaces again, we're going to go through some more learning of how to reimagine how we use the office space. So I'll give you some examples of how we're thinking about it. For example, we're not going to have office allocations, at least for product and engineering. We're not going to have office assignments for every engineer on the team. We're thinking in terms of neighborhoods, this idea of creating neighborhoods where teams can congregate, once a week or twice a week or, every other week, depending on whatever their rhythms of work are. For example, my teams tend to use an agile methodology for getting sort of driving work. So they use sprints and Kanban boards and Smartsheet. So what they're going to do is they're going to get together likely for their sprint rhythms. They might get together for backlog grooming, for retrospectives, maybe get together and have lunch one of the days in every couple of weeks, just as a bonding thing, in the cases where the teams are geographically located together. In some cases, I have situations where members of the team are all completely remote, right? So they're thinking about once a quarter, they want to get together and have sort of an offsite of bonding together. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to learn of what the new use of the office space is. It's because the real office for majority of my teams has become their new place of work, which is typically home, right? And office is now this offsite that they go to get together and sort of bond and so on. So I think we're going to learn, and that's how my CIO and I are thinking about how we adapt the office space.
Abdul, if I could turn to you, you heard what Prayer was saying there about how Smartsheet is adapting its working environment. What about a delivery hero? Have you made significant changes, or are you considering making changes?
Thank you very much for the question. I mean, I can only confirm what Purjit said. So we also have taken into account that awareness is key to success, right? So people have to adapt their new work of style to the new environment and to the new situation. And also at Delivery Hero, we had to put a lot of effort into showing our colleagues new systems, new technologies, and how to work collaboratively. And again, Delivery Hero is a tech-driven and data-driven company. So this means we have the state-of-the-art approach and using new technologies to make the life easier for our colleagues internationally.
Yeah, I mean, Abdul, staying with you for a moment, if I can ask another question. A major challenge, obviously, in implementing these new collaborative tools is the question of how to manage data integrity and security. We've all been excited to be video conferencing all day and every day, and then maybe a quiz in the evening and the weekends as well. But do you have a recommendation for how businesses can create clear policies around security and confidentiality in this dynamic working type of environment?
So it's a fantastic question, a very important question. I think it's essential that companies gain first a basic understanding of what a risk-based decision-making process is, right? What we see, or what I've seen also as a consultant back then, is either they don't care at all about privacy, about security, or there's an overkill of compliance and no innovation is possible, right? So I think you need to find the right balance between the desires of your employees for innovation and flexibility, and with the compliance requirements you have, right? So this means at the first step, you always have to identify, okay, what are the risks we are looking at when we are using new technology, right? Once the risks are identified and classified, you can move forward by defining the appropriate security measures to mitigate potential risk for your company. And this is not a task only for the companies themselves, right? So also the service providers companies need to have a similar approach and similar data protection of security standards, securing the confidentiality or accuracy, so the CIA of information security here. And so very basic examples for security measures could, for instance, be having an access control framework in place, using VPN, especially when working remotely, or very important business continuity plan, right? What happens if data is lost? So how much time do we really need and do we have to recover the information and run our business again smoothly? And lastly, maybe also backup procedures, but also access management frameworks, like how to protect information you want to have on external servers and external systems as well. And I think the most important aspect should always be that pragmatic and risk-based approaches will always bring the most the most sustainable solution for innovation. And I think the trick is to strike the right balance between, like already said, the employees' desires for flexibility and innovation and risk at the same time. And in the pandemic, we could clearly see very well that digitization, innovation were unfortunately not categorized in the Eisenhower matrix as not urgent and not important enough to be prioritized in the business planning. And with the pandemic, we could also see that exactly those companies lost the touch to innovation. And maybe to state one very important statistic is we could also see that in the pandemic period, the number of data breaches and cybersecurity incidents increased. And one of the reasons for that was that the organizations did not plan digitization and digital work environment in time and did not implement risk-based security measures.
So it's the old balance of risk and reward, really, Abdul. And Prerit, do you have any best practices are emerging on your side in dealing with this tricky balancing act that was described so well by Abdul?
I'd say there are several things Abdul said that really resonated and are consistent with what we are seeing. One of the things I think I'd sort of re-emphasize is a lot of companies that are experiencing the challenges are ones that were not intentional in planning to this digitization far before the pandemic, right? So who are not already technology-driven companies. I think the other thing around business continuity and disaster recovery and some of those elements were also that resonated. One of the advantages of using SaaS products like Smartsheet and online capabilities is that a lot of the data is now being protected on your behalf. You don't have on-premises data that you have to figure out how to back up and how to do DR on. As an example, with Smartsheet, we already run out of a cloud environment where we're running the service out of 3 different data centers, and also sort of make a copy of the data and store it in another region. So just as a data point, right, like you have now capabilities where you can really do a good job in protecting customers' data. And so a lot of those benefits you get, right, if you can stay ahead of the curve on technology.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, while we're on the subject of challenges, Prerit, one of the ones that a lot of people are talking about is the potential for cultural changes within the organization. You might feel a lack of unity. And although individuals maybe can celebrate having more autonomy now, it can come at the price, potentially, I guess, of collaborative efforts, co-creation, co-curation, ideation, brainstorming, all those great things. So those simple, spontaneous discussions that are the lifeblood of ideas are less likely to spring up organically, the corridor bumps and all of that kind of thing. And maybe you could end up with miscommunications or even duplicated efforts when two people are picking up the same project at the same time. Are you pursuing connection strategies, and what connection strategies can CIOs use to keep teams engaged and all pulling in the same direction, do you think?
It's a great question, Martin. In my role as the CTO for Smartsheet, I think I spend most of the time thinking about culture, right? As much as we talk about tools and effectiveness of tools, I think culture in the team of having people connected and moving in the same direction is fundamental to driving innovation and creating success. So there are quite a few things that I will point out, right? One of them is that even pre-pandemic, we were in 3 different locations. Majority of us were in Bellevue, Seattle area, but we had a significant presence in Boston and Edinburgh, UK. And all 3 of these teams do have to communicate and be effective and being aligned in moving the same direction, even prior to the pandemic. And we used to get sort of somewhat siloed because of 3 locations. And I think pandemic has helped us in some ways, where we have these culture mechanisms that we use. We call them weekly meetings. If they're like going to church. I'm not very religious, but it's a good analogy to talk about large-scale human cooperation and collaboration, right? Cultures are something that you have to continuously reinforce. So we have 2 weekly meetings. One of them is called the weekly business review. And that meeting is focused on what are the goals, what are the objectives and key results that the organization is driving. And we review those, and teams bring out any escalation issues so that they can get help from other leaders as well as senior leaders in the organization to unblock them. So that's a weekly meeting that gives teams a forum to get connected with each other, to get asked for help from each other across the entire 3 locations that we have. And then the other meeting we have is the weekly operations meeting. And that's I like to talk about this idea that as a Smartsheet, as a software, as a service company, I like to underline the word service, right? 25 years in my career doing this, we used to ship software and we would throw it over the wall and our customers would have to deploy it and operate it. As a SaaS business now, we operate the service, and which means we earn our customers' business every day, every hour, right? And so that's why we run a weekly operations meeting where we review the status of our service every week, right? How are we doing on performance and latency and availability? And that's another culture mechanism to remind everybody that we are a SaaS business. So that entire product and engineering gets together on this idea that we operate a service. So we look at operational issues. We talk about how to improve our operations. We do what we call post-incident reviews. If there has been a glitch somewhere in our service, we actually do a 5 why analysis on that, and we talk through that to drive learning in the organization as well. So these are very important culture mechanisms to keep the organization aligned. And now we're able to do them all in one forum, everybody online, sort of a single conversation rather than 3 pockets that was happening prior to that. So I think it is possible. You can continue to keep the organization aligned, as long as you're intentional about creating these culture mechanisms that connect people.
Well, absolutely. Mental health and well-being was a very important part of the IT function over the pandemic, certainly. Let's move on a bit. Tracking technology spend is an important topic of conversation in embracing this new way of working and collaborating. IT departments have taken on unforeseen new costs and technologies to make sure employees can continue working while they shelter. And I think now those needs have evolved. So, how should organizations, do you think, scale back or maintain certain services as workers return to the office? Maybe I could put it to you first, Abdul, and then over to Prerit after that.
I think my question will be very short because luckily our organization is very well planned in advance. So we take into account the flexibility aspect when planning new tools and new systems. So this means any system that we can also take Smartsheet as an example. What we could see also during the pandemic is due to the lack of personal meetings, we had to rely on collaborative tools. So this means We started with a very small number of users, and now we are almost getting into or are even in the enterprise level, right? So this is an approach and also the benefit for a SaaS solution. So we can scale up or down depending on our needs of organization, and which of course also impacts our our calculation, our budget planning. And we are just right on the way of planning 2022. And we had to take this, and especially our CTO is doing an amazing job. And he also says, okay, guys, you need to plan the unforeseeable, right? So this means you plan. So it's always a benefit for you and the organization and me to have a certain budget as reserve for bad times. And we have seen that this bad time was, in our case, the pandemic, which really helped us to be flexible with the systems we use, to maybe even buy on an ad hoc basis, of course, with the appropriate due diligence process of the vendors. But we were quite flexible in this regard, right? So this is how we did basically with the cost aspect of systems.
Excellent. And Prerit, you're a cloud advocate yourself. I mean, it really stepped up and filled the breach during the pandemic. But do you see companies now going back to sort of business as usual, having a return to order? Or do you think some of these changes to become more mobile, to be more cloud-centric and digital-centric will be there for eternity?
I think we've made the change, Martin. We've made a permanent, I'd argue that we've made a permanent change in a lot of the ways we work. And use of collaborative tools, use of online meetings, those tools are here to stay and will be a predominant part of how organizations work and stay connected and be effective. On the question of budget and sort of how tools are picked, right? I'll just add to what Abdul said, which is, I think the more the leaders focus on bottoms up adoption of tools, the more effective those tools are going to be. Like I probably get a vendor solicitation like every day, right? Several solicitations every day. Some sales guy reaches out every day. And my default answer is, like, unless somebody in my organization is actually using the tool and is driving the adoption of that, right? The recommendation has to come bottoms up for me to even consider it, right? Majority of my engineers are individual contributors. They're actually building software or they're operating services. If they are not using the tool, I don't want to be the one forcing a tool down their throat, if you will, right? And so most of the time I just sort of ignore them, because if nobody in my team is asking for it, that means we don't need it. In fact, in the pandemic, we actually got rid of several things where it was clear that we were not getting the ROI on those tools.
Yeah, good opportunity to have a clear out. Well, look, we kind of touched on it already, but Gartner's predicting that corporate spending on cloud services alone is expected to rise by over 20% in 2021. So it's really on a run. Abdul, though, what metrics should guide data-led decisions on how to optimize current costs and plan future investments?
Good question. This is even a question which we ask almost on a weekly basis when we have our management meetings. But I think there are a lot of factors and data which will determine whether an SaaS solution will be used, and if so, to what extent, right? So just to name a few aspects, we are, for instance, asking in our meetings is, for instance, how many employees will use it? What is is the scope just locally for one team, or is it international, group-wide solution we are looking for, right? What data will we process? Very important question, which basically also led to a green light from the management for Smartsheet, was can cost even be saved by using a SaaS solution, because automated processes, can make some manual process currently performed redundant, which actually took place with our decision. And how complex is the implementation, and how costly will the implementation be? So we all know that you can purchase a big system, and the implementation will take 2 years to 3 years. So all these factors need to be duly taken into account when making the decision if we want to go further with a certain solution or not. And I also strongly believe that each of the questions can be answered in a way that favors the use of SaaS solutions if an objective rather than a subjective decision is made, right? So this is what we can also see in many companies is that they're not taking the key facts or key data as a basis for the decision, but to say, I like this company or not. And we are moving away from that, and we're just focusing on data and on the benefits for employees. And I think that we are still very much at the beginning of the digitalization, and that the use of SaaS solutions will play a very central role in the future. For a company, of course, several factors are important to decide whether a solution should be rolled out on an on-premise solution, on-premise structure, or whether an in-house development would make sense, or to go entirely by an SaaS solution. But the trend, what we can clearly see, and what I already did see in the past as a consultant, was more companies using away from an inflexible and very complex internal IT infrastructure to external SaaS solutions that offer many times more flexibility and innovation than a company would be willing to invest in internal solutions at all, right? So this means this is actually discussions and also the trend which we clearly see. But of course, and this is important to mention, is that many companies like we have high demands on the on data protection and cybersecurity, information security standards of the SaaS providers. So with the GDPR, this topic has received another really real boost, and both the companies, but also, for instance, SaaS companies like Smartsheet, they invest a lot of money and a lot of things to do amazing, to reach amazing results. And this is also what we see, right? So we see two things: innovation, flexibility, yes, but not if industry standards for compliance, for data protection, information security are not granted. And the one thing I think we all can agree to that is, in our today's age, data is the new gold, and it needs to be protected in accordance with that.
It's moved on from being the new oil. That's good to hear. I think we're all getting a bit tired of that one. Prerit, did you want to come in? And Abdul was very complimentary about your company there, which is nice.
Yeah, I want to thank Abdul for thanks for the comments there, Abdul. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, just building on that. Obviously, different businesses take different approaches to finding new tools and vendors. Prerit, what criteria should businesses be considering when they're adopting new platforms and unfamiliar platforms?
Great question, Martin. I think the first thing I said earlier, I'll still repeat that, which is you wanna see bottoms up adoption of tools. Right? Rarely do you see tools adopted being successful if it's a top down drive, right? You want your users wanting those tools, right? So I think that's the first thing I'll say, and the adoption of tools will be far easier when there is a bottoms up demand for the tools, right? So we use that criteria very seriously. We encourage our customers to do the same. Now, I also will sort of point out, as Abdul pointed out earlier, which is once you see bottoms up adoption, you do need to assess the tools relative to data protection, compliance requirements, and a lot of those governance and controls. Those are very important criteria because corporate data, as Abdul pointed out, is the new gold, or as you pointed out, is the new oil. But I think the bottoms up adoption is so you have to find that balance where it's a tool that your users want. They've been wanting it and using it, and then you can layer in the current governance and compliance and controls on top of that, right? And so you have to find that balance.
Yeah, do you concur with all of that stuff, Abdul? It sounds pretty inarguable, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I can just agree with that. But at least from our side, just from my own experience, from 4 years in this, on a multinational group. So if we want to go ahead with certain tools, of course, we always listen to what our employees want. But sometimes what the employees want is not what they will often get from the companies, right? So that's why it's quite important to make a proper due diligence at the one hand, but also to have a very scalable solution on the one hand, and on the other hand, which is user friendly. And this is what we see, that big corporations and big tools have very nice features and very nice process, but they're absolutely not user friendly. I mean, then you have your enterprise license, everything is set up, no one is going to use it. So, and this is, I think this would be the worst case for an organization.
Yeah, you kind of want that happy balance between all of the employees are telling you this Zoom thing is great, let's get in and kick out our video conferencing solution, and the governance and security aspect that ensures that tool is going to be right for the enterprise, not just the home user. Look, let's move on a bit. Some companies these days adopt the try fast, try many type approach and accept, inevitable degree of failure in pursuit of ultimate rewards. Others tread very carefully, research, and try to make the right decision here. But this obviously comes at the expense of velocity and speed. What approach should companies take, and how should businesses consider what should businesses consider rather before choosing an approach that's right for them? Maybe we could go Prerit and then Abdul. If that's
Sure,
okay.
Martin.
Prerit, please.
So, I think either approach by itself won't work. It's the way I kind of look. At least my experience, I found that depending on what tool or what problem you're trying to solve, distinct approaches work, right? So if you're trying to acquire a tool around collaborative work, right, you absolutely need the kind of the bottoms up pull because you want your users using it, right? So it's sort of very fundamental to kind of getting that. So you can take the approach of try many and fail fast, and sort of and then also sort of do the assessment of compliance and security, and right. So you can try that sort of iterative approach. But then we recently went through the process of deploying a SIEM system, a security incident and event management and monitoring system. In that particular example, right, because it is a critical backend infrastructure decision, we were very thoughtful about that. We had multiple POCs run through it with multiple vendors. We assessed what the technology's capabilities were in terms of detecting events and alarming capability. So we did a much more measured, thoughtful approach with multiple months of evaluation. And in that particular case, that was the approach we took because it was not going to impact the entire organization. It was a critical infrastructure component that we needed to deploy. And so I think you have to sort of decide what problem you're trying to solve, and depending on the problem you're trying to solve, I think distinct approaches can work, right? And so that's just my experience of it, right? But I'll sort of defer to Abdul as to what he's seen.
So very good question. So I would like to bring an example just to make a note here, right? So when I started working as a consultant, I had a really huge respect from big corporations, right? I said, oh, wow, okay, they're doing so many amazing things. They're delivering so many, amazing products. And then I started working as a consultant, as an auditor, and then I've seen in the back end, okay, wow, not everything is like displayed on the front end. So the back end is a huge mess. And it took me a couple of weeks, I would say, to understand why it's a good thing to fail, right? So because to give you an example, for instance, this is what I could see as a consultant comparing US-based companies with especially Germany-based companies is we have a clash of very conservative companies with this complete startup mentality. So this means the conservative companies plan everything into detail. It takes 2 years, and then the desired tool is already outdated. No one wants to have it, but the product is perfect. What they have seen in the US is more companies, they have an idea, they implement it quickly. It's not perfect, it works, it has bugs, and then they will repair the bugs over time. I personally prefer the US-based or the startup approach to first try and fail horribly, learn from that, and just continue improving your service and your product. This is much better than having end-to-end, perfectly planned, perfectly developed, but 5-year millions of euros spent projects with no results. Right, so that's my experience.
Yeah, I think the emerging consensus is fail fast is absolutely great. Just don't keep failing for the same reason over and over again. Learn from those failures. That's a great point, Abdul. And it brings us almost to the close. But I do have one final quick question for both of you. If I was to boil it down and say, if there's one thing you think will help your team or the workforce more generally accelerate their work and stay unified in a hybrid working environment, what would that be? I'm going to ask you to keep your responses to say about 30 seconds. Abdul, if you can go first, and then Prerit, if you don't mind following suit. Thank you.
Very short. One thing, progress before perfection.
Well, that's one of our values, Abdul. One of our corporate values is progress over perfection. But so thanks for saying that. So I would sort of concur with that. I don't think I need to add anything beyond that. It's about progress and learn. I think the only other thing I'll say, learn through that progress and making mistakes and adapt, right, rather than being very fixed and brittle.
Well, thanks so much, gentlemen, and I hope, following in that line of thinking, that people who are tuned into this webcast will have hopefully learned something. So on that, we're going to draw to a close. Thanks so much to Prerit Garg and also to Abdul Javdar for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to moderate on this rainy day in London, and we hope this discussion will help listeners visualize what the new world of hybrid working might look like. If you're looking for more expert insight on the way we work now and how to work better in the future, you can head to smartsheet.com/sessions to watch further episodes. And with that, I bid you all goodbye.
Thank you, Martin.
Shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. You